Can you hear me now? Yes, good. So just to confirm, we've got a couple of changes to this session. One due to family issues, and one due to miscalculation of time zone between Western Australia and the East Coast. So, so this session today. So where you are, you're in the Working with Young Men Symposium, a part of the Men's Health Connected Health Summit. I'm Glenn Poole of the Australian Men's Health Forum. This morning we were in the first session asking the question, why do we target young men? Do we need a gendered approach? I think this meeting has decided yes, fortunately, which means we can now continue with the conversation about working with young men. And we're going to focus in this session on some of the issues that people working with young men are dealing with. So we've asked a couple of speakers to come and tell us about the work that they do with boys and young men, and then to hone in on some of the key issues that they find that those young men are dealing with, and talk to us about how they might be responding to those issues. We were going to have Paul Zappa from the Men's Project, which is based out of Victoria, the Jesuit Society running that project. Unfortunately, Paul's had some family issues he's had to deal with overnight. Also, we're going to be joined by Delroy from Youth Focus in WA, who in recent years has been running the Young Men's Project, which is an excellent initiative. Unfortunately, Delroy's had a bit of an issue with the time zone and won't be joining us. Jane Higgins, however, CEO of the Odyssey program in South Australia, has been on our radar for a few years and has been doing work with young boys, which he's going to be telling us about quite shortly through the school system. And also joining us at short notice is Jai. What's your surname, Jai?
Cardona.
Jai Cardona.
Yeah.
You know from our friends up in the Northern Territory at the Darwin Indigenous Men's Service, who speak very highly of the work that Jai does. Did we meet when I was up in Darwin last year, Jai?
Sorry?
Did you and I meet when I was up in Darwin last year?
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
we were doing that project with young men.
Yeah, very briefly, and then we were at the NT Awards as well.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
thought so. Yeah, just trying to connect. We've been exchanging emails a lot. I was trying to connect. Did we actually meet in Darwin? And we did. Good. So then we've got two speakers, and I'm going to encourage everyone who's working with young men as well to bring your issues to this conversation to the table. But first, so we'll come to Jane first, and then Jai second. And what I'll ask each of you to do is I'll give you about up to 10 minutes to first introduce yourself so people know who's speaking, and tell us about the work you're doing. Tell us your story. Why do you work with young men and boys? And then lean into the issues that most challenge or interest you. Explain what they are, and then maybe talk about some of the ways that you're working with young boys to solve some of those issues. So Jane, thanks for being here. Haven't seen you face to face since
the awards.
Since the awards in South Australia this time last year. So nice to see you online, and looking forward to seeing you face to face again soon when we all get released from our current situation. Thanks for being here, Jane.
Thanks for having me. So you'd like me to start off?
Over to you. You've got
lovely.
10 minutes if you to tell us your story, and off you go.
Oh my God. Okay, I've only got 10 minutes. All right. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for the invite to have a chat with you all. I work with adolescent boys all over Australia. I'm based here in South Australia. So what I basically do is I go into schools and with my team of men and young men, and we work with adolescent kids from the ages of around 12 up to around 18. So we spend a day with the boys talking around masculinity. What does it mean to be a good man? What are the definitions that they've had around masculinity? What do they see culturally? What do they see in their homes? And what does media tell them about being a young man in Australia today? And then we go into things like friendships. So if you've got a mate who's doing something really dumb, how do you get out of that situation and still hold face? We talk about the bystander and the upstander versus focusing on bullying situations at a heart. We look at how we can change culture within a cohort or within a school as well. And then depending on what the school's got as an issue, so some schools might have drug and alcohol, they might have some leadership issues. It just depends on what they've got. We've got a range of workshops that we offer schools. And then we will go into respectful relationships. So what does it mean to have a respectful relationship? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What isn't it? And what are their rules for relationships? And all types of relationships, not just intimate relationships, but right across the board. And then we get the boys at the end of the day to fill out a survey for us around what they thought of the day. And 99% on it's about 94% of boys say it was either very good or excellent, which is always really good feedback from the boys themselves, and they write little comments and around what they learned from the day as well. And then we feed that back to the school. So we work with our clientele schools that are over 100. I've been doing this for over 12 years now, and I suppose the reason we started was because I met a boy in a park. My son was about 3 at the time, and he was bopping around on his bike, and this young boy walked into a park. He was clearly distressed. He was in a private school uniform, and he sat down and he had a cigarette. He lit a cigarette and he smoked it, and he lit another cigarette, and then he lit another cigarette, and I went, I think we have a problem here. So I went over to him and said, you know, are you okay, honey? And he said, yeah, miss, I'm all right. And I went, oh, I don't think so. So I sat down with him and just sat and was with him. And he had told me that his life was fucked as far as he was concerned. He had been bullied at school. His grades had dropped. He was a boarder at the local school. He was really struggling, and he'd just come out as being gay. So my background is social work and counselling. So my question to him was, okay, and are you thinking of killing yourself? And his answer was yes. Now, all the hairs on my arms stand up when I tell this story, and I've told it many, many times. So that day I decided that I wanted to be part of the solution and provide a safe space for young men to explore who they are and who they want to be. So the birth of Odyssey was from that young man who may never know that this was the beginning of something that has affected thousands of boys all over Australia now. So that's the beginning of what I do. I have a team in Victoria, and I have a couple of guys that work there. We also provide workshops for adolescent girls as well. And it's great because then they get the same sort of messages. So if a school books us, we get the boys and the girls, and we tend to work right across the cohort with them. So that's what I've been doing for 12 years, and I'm incredibly blessed. I love my work. To be in space with young people when they feel so, they really want to learn. Like, there is so much focus on the academia that, providing them a space for their well-being, for emotional intelligence, for resilience, to be able to talk about masculinity in a safe space is a pretty honouring thing to be involved in. So that's kind of my story, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some more stories of what you're doing and any questions that you have around what we do and how we do it as well. So thanks.
Thanks, Jane. And if there was one particular issue that you could pick out, mental health, sexuality, bullying, what's the one that vexes you the most, or you most want to get your teeth into, or are getting your teeth into?
I think at the moment, I think porn is one of the biggest, the pornography, because it affects so many areas of young boys' lives, and it affects their masculinity, it affects how they feel about themselves, it also is part of the shaming that young boys get involved with, and it really needs to be in a space where we can have open dialogue around what they're seeing and be able to critically analyse it. So I think, and the relationships that affect so many relationships that they're having, the expectations that they have as well. So I think, while we're very broad in the topics that we cover, pornography in the last few years has become a really major focus.
Okay, so we'll lean into that a little bit more
Sure.
once we've got to know Jai Cardona. So Jai Cardona, it does many things across the youth space. It's come to our attention through the Darwin Indigenous Men's Service, who are a real friend of the Australian Men's Health Forum, and he's come highly commended from their chair in particular, Damien Mick, who sent me a massive long list of all the things that Jai's done. I remember meeting you last year, and I think you were involved in one project I was aware of last year, and then I saw this list of all the other things you've been doing. So it sounds awesome, and I'll let you tell your story in your words, Jai. You know, who you are, where you've come from, what kind of things you're doing in relation to work with young men, and any particular issues you want to sort of bring to the conversation. Over to you. You're strapped in and ready to go.
Yes. Yeah, look, thanks for that. I really appreciate being a part of this forum, and also really appreciated those words from yourself, Jane, as well. You pretty much, I could have pretty much said the exact same things as far as what we were seeing with my engagement with, I guess, young men and boys as well. And I'll touch on the pornography stuff a little bit later on. But my name's Jai Cardona. I'm up in the Northern Territory at the moment. I'm born and raised here. I'm a Canarigan man, which is about an hour and a half south of Darwin, so we're paperbark people. And yeah, so I guess my working background has been within Aboriginal health, and particularly looking at youth detention around Australia and how we transition back to, I guess, communities, and also really looking at the journeys of that we have as men, but around mental health and how we deal with that and the steps and stages we go through. I had actually linked in with Glenn last year through the Life Itself movement, which was a men's sort of yarning circle connection opportunity up in Darwin on Wednesday nights. So funny story with that. Basically, I just moved back to Darwin last year from living in Brisbane. I come off a broken relationship, was pretty down. I was actually living in my my cousin's house, and I was staying in my niece's room. So she was relegated back to her mum's room, and I was staying in my niece's room with these pink Barbie curtains and this Bratz blanket, and I was unemployed. I got back into drinking. I was just feeling like absolute shit, and I said, look, what do I really want right now? And it was connection. And that's when I thought, well, why don't I try and organize something so I can connect? And I wanted to connect with people around my age. I'm 28 now, and I was really hoping to sort of connect them with that and try and have conversations and just feel a part of something. So the Life Itself sessions began when I approached the Palmerston Council, which is just outside of Darwin, and they offered to let me utilise the space just for a trial for 6 months. I had no idea how it was going to go. I was absolutely crapping myself, but it ended up being a really powerful 6 months. Unfortunately, we had to stop because of just availability of people to organise and life getting in the way, but it was a really great environment of where we were getting about it would have been about 6 to 12 young men at a time at each session. It built up from literally 2, and just coming in and out, having these, I guess, just sit downs where we'd have dinner, have a laugh, and then also talk about some of the things that affect us. I was really surprised to see that out of the I guess the demographic, we had a lot of young fellas who are about 18 or 19 years old come down and talk, whereas I was kind of expecting more people around my age, around that 28, 29-year-old mark. And so that was a really positive thing, and it was a lot of learning for me as well, and it gave me a bit of healing. And then from that, I kind of wanted to look around and see where else I could connect in, and that's when I started connecting in with the Darwin Indigenous Men's Service, and that's been great. It's been amazing just finding these little pockets where you can be vulnerable and sit back and think. Now, even though the Life Itself sessions don't happen anymore, I actually run my own mentoring and connection sessions in Dondale Youth Detention Centre on Wednesdays, and that's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. I sit down and have dinner. We talk about whatever issues they're ready to talk about at that time, and basically it's all about sort of, I guess, guiding where we want to go and who we want to be. So I've been really fortunate, particularly in the last year, to have worked with a lot of young boys and men. Sorry, and I forgot one more thing. I was really fortunate to have worked for an organisation which ran a youth hub. So I ended up being the coordinator and the team leader of a youth hub where we'd have up to 40 youth at a time come in. A lot of the time these youth were at risk, and just watching, I guess, the behaviours of and engagement of a lot of boys from 12 to 13 and then the 16 to 17 marks was a really interesting time, which I was very lucky to learn from. Just to jump to the issues, relationships is absolutely massive. I see that disconnect that a lot of young men and boys have now through relationships. We can talk about social media having a play in that as well. I think we can also talk about the disconnect between, the generation. And if we talk about young people, we go 30 downwards to say about 10. The disconnect from the older generations due to the technological evolution that we've had has been hard to understand, and the new ways we look at the world. Youth aren't connecting in or struggling to connect in with, I guess, their elders a lot. I can talk about that from an Aboriginal point of view, but also generally in mainstream, we're seeing the disconnect a lot of the times, particularly from youth between young boys from 14 to 18. They're always crying out for those male role models. They're always wanting to know what their dad's doing or where they are. But they're also falling into this narrative of that. I guess we've got lateral violence within men ourselves, where we believe that we're only a certain thing. Just the same as we look at pressures with what women face, and there's many, and also body, stigmatization and stuff like that. We started looking at sports and the role that it actually plays in men. And this was really interesting to me. And sorry, I know I've only got 10 minutes, but we look at rugby league, for instance, and if you're one of the muscly, and we learn this from boys, if you're one of the muscly boys, you'll be a second rower or a lock. If you've got fat on you, you'll be a prop. If you're skinny and wiry, like I was, you're a winger. So we start learning that we fit in a box with how we look as well. And so it's just kind of having these conversations around not fitting in the boxes that you think you need to be in. Pornography is a absolutely huge issue as far as relationships and outlooks, outlooks on the world. We're looking at, I guess, due to the digital age, I guess you could say from people born in probably from 1990 and then upwards, have basically had access to pornography videos from 12 or 13 or before that. And so this is a new learning curve. I remember being, I remember being 12 when, you know, the dial-up internet sort of was a kind of a thing, and then that access to all this broader material was there. But now we've got a generation of boys and girls who have access to phones, and can access any of this information. And I really see the difference in how some of these boys talk about their relationships, and consent. Consent has been a big chat I've had, particularly in the youth detention centres, about understanding things around that, and that value. So I guess just to try and wrap it up, it's really around those relationships with themselves, and others, and really valuing that and that connection.
Great. Thanks, Jai. Thanks for bringing all you're bringing to this this conversation, both in terms of your own personal journey, but the work you're clearly doing to make a difference for others. And to set aside the porn, which is clearly going to be an issue you both want to pick up. I'm sure there's a load of questions people might have around the Dondale Detention Centre, and you know, the kind of lives and journeys that are and issues that are putting young fellas into that place. So, Jane, not only did you officially win the race to drop the first F-bomb of the day. Congratulations! you get our official prize for the day. You also brought porn to the table. So open up this conversation. I'm sure loads of people in this room have got experienced thoughts, but where do you want to start with this? What are you seeing? How does it manifest as an issue for you? How do you engage with it? Over to you.
Okay, so I suppose what we're finding is that younger people are accessing porn, you know, on their phones, on their computers, you know, even, and just a reminder, this space is obviously safe space. What's said in Vegas stays in Vegas. But, you know, my son, when he was younger, downloaded some porn onto his phone, and, you know, he's now 20, but, you know, he did this in grade 6, and then a man, really smart little cookie, decides then to download it onto his phone, got an app, allowed him not then to be connected to the internet, took it to school, showed his mates at school. And what does mum do for a job? You know, talk to boys about being respectful. Fantastic. So, you know, get called into the office, and, you know, he'd broken this, I suppose, this connection that he'd had with other boys, because he thought he was doing it so that these kids would perceive him as being cool and, you know, part of the group and, you know, up and happening. But unfortunately what happened was he lost his best mate over it. And it was a really interesting learning time for all of us, I suppose, including him and his friends as well, because luckily, you know, his best friend actually did dob him in, and we managed to curtail it early. And I, you know, thank that kid. I think that was a very brave thing for him to do. So, you know, this is happening at a very early age, and it's incredibly graphic. I mean, the porn when I was growing up, you know, we had Playboy and Penthouse, and I remember getting Raquel Welch and opening her up, and not her up, but, you know, the fold out, and going, I want to look like that when I'm older. You know, she was the most beautiful creature on the planet. But now what we're seeing is, you know, labia surgery on girls. You know, we're seeing young men who are taking Viagra. You know, this is in porn. It's bestiality. You know, I did a presentation recently for a school and for the parents. And one of the things when I was doing some research on it, you know, Minefield, which is, you know, one of the things that boys are into at the moment, and they've got porn and they've got Minefield porn. So, you know, if you're into anything, it is available to you, you know, 24/7, 7 days a week, and it's graphic. The other part that concerns me is we've got, and as Jai was talking about too, you know, the consent, which I think is a major part of what we need to be doing with educating young people right across the board, but especially sexual consent. You know, it's got to be enthusiastic, it's got to be continuous, it's got to be verbal. And and young people just have not been getting those kind of messages. So that really concerns me. Sorry about the doorbell in the background. I'm having all these tradies working around me at the moment. Sorry. So I think also consent, as far as, you know, giving grandma a hug, it starts early, and those kind of things that we need to be having conversations with young people about. The other thing that concerns me is, you know, I've been in some schools where I've had young men who have been expelled because they've been year 11s, they've decided to have a consensual relationship with each other. The young man has put the young woman in compromising positions. She had agreed at the beginning, but halfway through she withdrew her consent. But his answer was, "You like it like that, bitch." So, and he took that straight out of porn. My problem with that is, obviously, is that she then charged him with sexual assault, which she has every right to do because she withdrew her consent. But he's confused. He's watching one thing on one hand, you know, pornography, and then he's trying to imitate that in real life and coming up with all the issues that he's coming up with. So I think porn goes into so many different relationships that we have to be really mindful of what we're teaching young people about it.
Right. Thanks, thanks, Jane, and for your builders off. Just for some ground rules, we are actually recording this, though we won't use anything that anyone asks not to be used. So this is theoretically a public platform, but there's 30 people in the room. So I ask that you treat what's said in confidence, and we're not instantly just going off and broadcasting these recordings. And on sensitive subjects like this, we will be entirely responsible and take into account any request for confidentiality, as Jane just did there, understandably for her son, which is completely understandable to want that. So I'm interested to get into then, and it's good to map out what the issue is, but I'm also interested to get in, well, what are the actual things that we're doing to try and address that issue when we're working with young boys in school. But I'll just come back to Jai first and say if he wants to sort of unpick or add or take on anything that you've shared there in terms of what he's seeing in relation to porn, which is something which he raised in his introduction. Jai.
Yeah. Look, very much echo Jane's words as well. You know, one of the conversations I had with youth that I knew quite well in the youth hub, because we have access to internet, and you know, we spend quite a lot of time with youth there. And what was quite a worry was that we had a chat around use of porn, and you know, they thought it was all funny to have it at school and all these other things, and these are boys who are 13, and then they mentioned what they were looking at and trending, and it happened to be family type porn with sort of, you know, stepsister or mother and things like that. And it really alarmed me that you've got these very young minds that are actually getting these shaped, I guess, really demonizing family, and it is very scary. And what we're going to see, if there aren't the adequate programs out there, is a lot more youth being charged for sexual offences as well. On the flip side of things, with this day and age, I feel that some youth, particularly with females, are much more aware than they may have previously been around consent and what's right and not right, and what's, you know, what may be funny to a boy isn't right, and things like that. But it's also going to see a spike in, if there's not enough education around boys and girls understanding that consent side of things, and parents understanding it, that you'd see a lot more around the sexual offence assault stuff. So Yeah, and particularly with me working in youth detention as well, around some youth that may have had these, I guess, sexual charges. You can see the difference in what their thinking is. As far as solutions go for it, there's obviously training parents up for that as for those conversations. But I really think in schools and in other NGOs, there really needs to be set conversations to train staff up around how to talk about this. I felt very, very awkward when this stuff first came up, how to talk to a 12 or 13-year-old around it. And if I had some guiding stuff or even resources or videos to help assist with those conversations, I think that would have really helped.
Great. Thanks, Jai.
Mm.
So, where do you learn to have a conversation about porn with a 12 or 13-year-old? That's a really tough starting point. It's not something any of us sort of like expect to be doing or conversations we expect to be having. I'm really interested to. I would like us to lean into more of that solution focus, because this session is about tough issues plus what's working, and I'm also interested to get reflections from the room as well. I've noticed that Gary's got his hand up. I noticed that Amy from Top Blokes has joined us, who's speaking in a later session, but I know it'd be a topic that you guys are dealing with in schools. Didn't warn you that we're going to walk straight into a conversation about porn, but then I guess in your industry, it's not unexpected, Amy. So if you want to contribute, you're very welcome. And anyone else who's in the room, I see there's some comments coming on here in the chat box as well from Arian and Alex. So lots of people we can potentially hear from. But Gary, you had your hand up first, so I'll go to you. And give me a nod. Anyone else, if you want to contribute, wave a hand or just give me a visual nod. Gary?
Hi, Jai. Hi, guys. I'll just be brief. How do we talk to younger people about sexuality in general and pornography as one of those sort of facets? In my limited experience with rites of passage programs, where we've had boys 12 to 16, what I found was the magic, and I was quite amazed how much they were willing to share, was to create the sacred space. So they're with their dads, they're with uncles, they're with facilitators. There's a log fire, we're all sitting around in a circle with a mug of coffee, and it might have started a little bit uncomfortable. That's not an easy subject. But as we got a few laughs going, and as the space warmed, and we knew that we wouldn't be shamed and it wouldn't leave that space, I was pretty amazed how deep the young guys were willing to share. Trying to talk about stuff like that in a normal daily environment, that's not easy, and not all parents are really, equipped to go there. So in this kind of empowered space, that's my recommendation, is that I actually saw amazing stuff shared if you create the right space. That's it. Thanks.
Yeah, and coming to you in a second, Amy. Yeah, Gary, I've certainly heard guys in the sort of rites of passage, men's gathering world over here in Queensland sharing, similar stories to what you've just said, that create the right environment for fathers and sons, and they'll have really open and authentic conversations. So if you create the right environment, the conversations emerge, and that's not just really helpful for the young men, but it's also incredibly rewarding for the fathers as well, to be able.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Can I just say, Glenn, too, where we are with technology, sadly, I don't really think there's any going back.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we must deal with this. We've got to get, as Jai said, he would love to have a framework or a structure, because kids aren't going to stop using mobile phones, and we're not going to get less connected. We're going to get more connected. Yeah. So yeah, we've got to deal with it.
Yeah, and thanks also, Gary, for linking that as well. Also, just that general conversation about sex. I mean, I'm 50. My dad was born in the 30s. His parents were incredibly sort of Victorian, born in the Edwardian era, but incredibly Victorian, and all of that kind of repressed belief around sex and sexuality was carried forward. And I remember he was also a very dutiful man who knew that he had certain roles and responsibilities as a father. So much so that, and he was a beekeeper, and so much so that I can't remember what age, maybe about 11 or 12. He actually sat me down in the bathroom, of all places, on the edge of the bath, and he brought a bee in from outside, and he explained how bees reproduced, and then mumbled something and it's like that with humans too, and ran away. And I was perplexed, and it was only about 10 years later, in my early 20s, I suddenly went, "Oh, that was the birds and bees talk." But of course, by that stage, I'd already found, that was the late 70s, early 80s. We used to find, print pornography lying in ditches and things. We'd already had that kind of schoolyard education about, from our best mate John, who had 6 older sisters and who knew everything, or we thought he knew everything. And that was before the age of smartphones, or even. Can
I just put a quick positive spin on one aspect of sexuality? Is that it's very related to relationships, which I've already said are really important about being inclusive. So here's something that rang to me when Arian said that a lot of older counsellors or parents, whatever, we're not connected with a lot of the young people, even in the terms, we need to understand their terminology, how they talk around relationships. Hooking up is a thing, or they're having a thing. It's not the same as when I grew up. There was boyfriend, girlfriend. It was completely different. So we need to actually know the positive side if we're going to help lead them into a modern relationship.
I reckon that's sorry, Gary. I reckon that's such an important aspect too when we talk about relationships, where there's seems to be this grey area, particularly when working with boys and younger men, this grey area of the seeing stage now, where it's not quite monogamous. It's sort of there's all these grey barriers and different levels of thinking, and it's really about being quite clear as well, and I guess assisting people, and boys to learn to really be clear with what their intentions or what they want, because that is such a true statement that you made there, that there's this extra, it's not just boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever you want to call it anymore. There's steps between, and it's creating a lot of chaos in the lives of a lot of young boys and girls.
Right. Thanks, Jai. I want to come to Amy Harvison of the Top Blokes Foundation in New South Wales. Amy.
Thanks, Glenn. I just wanted to come back to a question that was posed in the chat about how do we talk to young boys, men or young boys, about porn without coming off as superior, which is something that we do in our programs as well. When we talk about realities of porn, for example, in our programs, our mentors come around that topic by addressing it as the evidence base behind it. So if you are engaging in too much porn, this is actually what's happening to you neurologically. You're resetting your stimuluses. This is what's happening inside of you by engaging in this, and this is how you can actually reset it. So instead of saying don't do it because it's bad, we understand some level of porn use is healthy, some level of masturbation is healthy, and we encourage that in our boys. But what we do understand is giving them the evidence and that critical thinking piece to allow them to make informed decisions around the topic actually helps, rather than say don't do it, it's bad. So one of the things that we find a lot with our boys when we do talk about this is we will actually wrap up every session we have with our boys by issuing them a challenge. And when we do the realities of porn session with them, we actually give them a challenge to withhold for a week. Don't do it for a week and come back and tell us your stories next week of how you went. So that way we're teaching them that there is an opportunity to reset stimulus, but also just gauging how they're going to go out there, knowing what they know, whether they're still going to engage or whether they're going to make healthier decisions around that. Oh, sorry, Glenn, you're on mute.
I am. Thanks, Amy. And you've sort of lent in there to the kind of the abstinence versus harm reduction kind of approach. Father Mitch Porter, would you like to make a contribution here?
It's funny, actually, because Amy got in just before me and said basically exactly the same thing that we're working with where I am. That is that if you go in with the approach of teaching them and helping them to understand what's going on with the chemicals in their brain as a result of overexposure, you get a much, much better reaction than, and, you know, funnily enough, I work for an organization that might have had a thing or two to say about the issue over the years. I'll give you 3 guesses. If you are honest with them and you get them to understand that you are actually physically rewiring your brain, and I was so happy that Jai and Jan brought it up at the start because it was the one thing I wanted to talk about, but I was a bit iffy about broaching it because, you know, sex-obsessed clergyman, big surprise. If you teach them about it the same way you can teach them about drugs, and that it will rewire your brain chemistry, it will get into you. You can get addicted to the stuff, and it's an absolute nightmare to get off it once it's trapped you into it. But the other thing is also talking to them about what can happen as a result of that, because most young blokes, for example, even though marriage and all that, they don't necessarily want to get married, but later on in life, they want to have a wife or a partner. They want to be in a long-term committed relationship. They want to have kids. And if you talk, for example, Jai brought up the massive rise in, say, for example, incest porn and that sort of stuff. If you actually talk to them about it and say, well, you realize if you get too deep into this, then we'll get to the point where you're not actually going to be able to be intimate with your partner anymore. And it's going to get worse and worse and worse as it goes on. And in the end, you're going to end up almost having no choice but to move away from them to get a sexual gratification. And if you tell them that, it's not about scaring them, but it can shock them into realizing just how nefarious and sly porn can be.
Thank you, Father Mitch Porter. Not a sex-obsessed clergyman, to be absolutely clear. Check out his LinkedIn profile. It might say that. I don't know.
You don't know how many kids I've got.
You know, you've reminded me when we played cricket against the Catholic college St. Joe's when I was a kid, and I was really confused. Anglican background. The first lad came in and said, "I'll have middle stump, please, Father." And I thought, oh, his dad's a teacher. That's nice. The second kid came in and said it. I thought, he's got 2 sons here. But it got to about the 4th or 5th guy, and I thought, how many kids has this bloody bloke had? And then I went, Father, you idiot. It's a Catholic school. Anyway, I digress. You just gave me a flashback to my youth, which was quite a relief from some of the flashbacks to my youth I've been having because of this conversation. So thank you, Father. Who else wants to jump in on this conversation? We're leaning now into some of the solutions in terms of, like, you know, Amy at Top Blokes and Father Mitch talking about from their experience what works in terms of engaging boys in these conversations. Anyone else want to make a contribution here? You can wave, or you can actually wave, or yeah. Our spokesman for the youth of Australia, Arian Cook.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just something that it's just an argument. Well, I wouldn't say it was an argument, but a discussion. I tried to turn into a discussion I had recently with a coworker who I would describe as, I don't like to judge people, but man-child, like 35-year-old, but still living at home with mum, playing video games, etc. You know, essentially behavior that I'd expect of a 15-year-old boy continuing into manhood, right? He basically didn't believe me when I said I didn't watch porn, or you know, I knew other people that didn't. And I feel like that's a big behavior. They honestly it's something that they feel everyone does. It's completely normal. And if you don't do it, you're lying. You're ashamed. You're lying. You're trying to hide it. I think that's really funny. I did mention there's a big movement at the moment called No Fat, various other movements. Have you heard of them?
Yep.
Cool. So like I said, the way you can market it so well to young guys is like, look, it's a superpower. And it does work, you know. There's something amazing about that. If you say, look, do you struggle with confidence? Do you struggle with feeling ashamed of yourself? And showing them that perhaps if they brought more integrity in, they'd have more natural energy around if they weren't wasting it. And there we go. Yeah, and I like what you said about addressing it from a neurological point of view. It's basically, I've seen that it's very similar to heroin. If you basically say, would you like heroin? Yeah, thanks for sharing the link. I'd be curious to see how Wikipedia frames it.
Yeah, it's the Bible of all truth, of course, as we know. But I thought, there you go. People understand how credible Wikipedia is. They can take that.
It says it's been simplistic, outdated, incorrect. So I see that. Yeah, it's very interesting. But we can talk about that later.
Sure. So yeah, and on that neurological piece first, I mean, something that really struck me is actually just in simplistic terms. We talk about in the men's health space about male friendly services. And often a lot of that is about just how you communicate issues with blokes, you know, rather than going in and saying, and this doesn't have to be about, you know, porn. This can be about, you know, heart health or prostate or whatever, you know. It's like sometimes it's just the way you talk about stuff. And rather than actually treating men as a patient, putting yourself on a step up, whether that's sort of through moral superiority or through taking a position of, you know, I'm the expert and you don't know, because actually we're all the expert in our own life, right? But that if you actually, you know, give blokes technical information and education, often that's a really good starting point. And actually, we're speaking with a psychiatrist on our Blokes on the Couch program during Men's Health Week. And I often talk in simplistic terms of how one way to communicate effectively with men is start from the outside in rather than the inside out. So, you know, rather than going, you know, bloke's distressed, he's suicidal, we need to get him to talk about how he's feeling about it. Actually ask him what the bloody hell's going on in his life that's having him respond in this way. And he will tell you. Ask him how he feels about it. Often he'll just hasn't got a clue. It's like speaking in a foreign language. Does that mean that men can't speak about their feelings or other emotions? Not at all. But if you build connection through the outside world first, you then build trust and rapport, and those deeper, more layered and nuanced emotional conversations. So I just call that the outside-in approach versus the inside out. And then I sat for 5 minutes listening to one of our psychologist Blokes on the Couch last week, explaining how he works with men in therapy. And he had a much more sophisticated way of saying it, but it was exactly the same thing. He talked about building up the architecture of the man's life, getting an understanding of what his day looks like, what he does, how he responds, who the characters are. He talks about creating almost like the stage set of this man's life in order that he could actually get an understanding and therefore build rapport. And I can, you know, if you go charging in and go, right, boys, we're going to talk about porn and how you need to stop doing it, you're never going to get anywhere. But that science approach, that's great. Here's some facts. Here's some stuff. Here's some information. Here's a conversation about the reality versus the kind of fantasy of porn. What a really awesome and authentic way to engage. So I'm going to come back to. I'm not sure where to take NoFap at the moment, Arian, but you've tabled it, so it's there. It's in the conversation. You're muted.
It says I can hold down spacebar. It doesn't seem to work too well. Yeah, I think this is bigger than any one movement. You know, again, we need to like peel off. It's not about joining one little group and banding together. It's kind of looking a lot deeper. I think, you know, a lot of young guys might even do that. They might abstain, but they will still, some part of them still has a desire, and they're actually suppressing the desire. And I think you haven't fixed the issue until that desire is gone, or until it's it's not something that's appealing. If it's still something that you want to do and you're just stopping yourself from doing it, you're just not going to feel too good about it. So there's some deeper understanding, but I guess it comes with maturity. But moving on.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting for me is that we don't have to move on at all. Sorry, we can keep that on the table. Something that comes up for me, as someone who abstains from eating meat, and I abstain from smoking now, but more importantly, I abstain from drinking. And still, there is a kind of odd attitude towards people who don't drink. I mean, even just going to a doctor's surgery and filling out a form, it will often say, how many cigarettes do you smoke? Lots, not so many, none at all. It's assumed that not smoking is an option. When you get to the alcohol box, it'll often just say, well, how much do you drink a week? Is it once, twice, 3 times, 4 times? There isn't an option.
On, yeah.
An option that there's no times, because it's kind of like, well, obviously you drink, but just one.
Yeah, it's very much our society. Yeah, our culture.
Want to know how much you drink, and then we're going to double with, like, guys, how often do you masturbate? Is it once or more than 100? And maybe not at all might not be an option, because there's an assumption that that it is just something that, or how often do you watch porn? It's an assumption that everyone does, and it seems in some areas of this stuff, and that move to our now much more permissive age, and away from some of the awful rigidity of the past, that the idea of abstinence as a choice has got somewhat of is perhaps more taboo than actually doing stuff. Not doing stuff.
The pendulum has certainly swung. I think there's definitely there's an element of awareness that needs to be had, because obviously suppressing something is not going to work. If it's a natural, as we said, these things are just there, and regardless of how you feel about them, they're going to be there. So you've got to pay attention to them and sort of, I think blindly blocking them out or blindly indulging them, they're both just as bad. You're not paying attention to it. So, it's good that we're talking about raising awareness with it.
Yeah, and I wonder if that thing around abstinence is to do with the fact that it often comes associated with an ideology. You instantly.
It's true.
Yeah, you instantly, if you think someone preaching abstinence, you instantly think, well, they're also preaching a particular religious ideology.
The next thing I'd like to say is, I think this ideology goes deeper. I think there's men that don't even need to use porn, but then they'll just use Tinder. Now suddenly they're using life like their own little internet thing. It's still the same game. It's still, they're using another human being as a masturbation tool. They're not dealing with connection. And it's pretty sad. They can do that. They can browse through a bunch of women like a grocery catalog, and women are doing the same thing with men. I'd love to talk about Tinder, because that's just terrible. And then they can just realize these things, and they can satisfy this kind of fantasy, and it's really just completely empty.
Right.
So even with physical relationships, it can be just as unhealthy as masturbating. And masturbating can be healthy if done consciously, I think.
Understood. Thanks, Arian, for sharing that. I'm going to come to Amy, and then I'm going to come back to Jane, who actually brought this topic to the table. Amy?
There was 2 points that came to mind as we were just having that discussion. The first one is the issue that we have at Top Blokes with the NoFap is the challenge issued NoFap November. So all the boys are very familiar with taking the month of November off, but to counter that, there's Destroy Yourself December. So effectively, there's a secondary challenge that actually undoes all of the work. So it's all about ensuring that that education piece and awareness is fed through with the challenge of NoFap. It's not just about NoFap, it's about the education piece that sits behind that. In terms of what was just mentioned with Tinder, we have 3 programs. We work with primary schools, high schools, but we also work with the older cohort, the 18 to 24-year-olds. When we work with our older boys, what we hear consistently from them is they have a really good understanding how to hook up. It's super easy. There's lots of apps to help them aid that. but they don't know how to build an honest and sustainable connection. So what we find through the work that we do, it's starting from actually primary school, teaching young boys from primary school age how to build healthy and intimate platonic relationship that leads us into high school, and teaching them how to build intimate relationships that are healthy and sustainable. Because our boys are telling us once they get to 22, 23, 24, they can hook up, but they don't know how to have a relationship, which is really sad to hear.
Yeah, gonna come to to Jane and to Jai, who are our featured speakers, and then if we've got time, we'll come to some other people. So Jane, what's and really, well, anything you're picking up from this conversation, but also interested to hear what we know is working.
Okay, so I suppose I would agree with Amy. I think those conversations need to be had really, really early, and it needs to be part and parcel. I mean, certainly with my boys, we talked about porn from when they were about 6 years old, because it was really important that they understood that if they ever came across it, what they were seeing. You know, we didn't have locks on everything. We chose not to do that as a family. We chose education as the way of going. Doesn't work for every family. Everyone's different. But, you know, we really explained to them that what they were seeing was not real in so many ways, and they knew that they were actors and that they were playing a part, like they were seeing a movie and so forth. So those conversations became integral in all it just was everywhere. You know, a movie we'd watch together, you know, a normal movie, and we would have those conversations about what are you seeing in the relationships there, you know, is there consent given? So I think in an ideal world, having those family environments that are really positive is a great start. It's not always possible, obviously. I also think that we need to be able to teach young people critical analysis of imagery and what they're seeing as far as media. And, you know, we can talk about porn as far as just, you know, Pornhub or whatever, but really you look at advertising anywhere and it's so sexualized. And so they're surrounded with those images from the word go. And when we go into schools, as I'm sure other programs are too, you know, it's our imagery is, and I don't mean sexy in a sexualized way, but it's hot, it's fast, it's bright, there's music. You have to have that to counteract what those kids are seeing already. You can't just put up a black and white photo and say, let's talk about porn. That just doesn't resonate with them. So you've got to be with them at their cultural level, I think, and where they're in tune as well. And I think also safe space is really important. We tell stories about ourselves and our own experiences, and you can hear pin drops in a room when you're actually explaining about yourself and what's part of your journey, because they're just not used to adults self-disclosing and explaining how, you know, things have been difficult for them, but how they've risen to different occasions and been able to be more resilient as time's gone on. So, you know, personal stories, I think, are incredibly important when you're working with young people. It really is the language that they listen to. Storytelling is huge. Sorry, door bang. And then being also really mindful of your own language in schools or in homes around, you know, what people are saying about women, what people are saying about young men. You know, when we say all young men are angry, or there they go again beating up someone, you know, this their us and them mentality that we seem to see in media, I think does young men no favours at all. Because what they tell us about when we talk about anger and so forth is 9 times out of 10, the thing that concerns them the most when they're at school, and they get told off for things that they didn't do and they get blamed. And so you finish up with a blaming culture with young men and the feeling of shame, and then they act out and we go, what's going on here? You know, and of course it's breeding from those kind of things of shaming young men, and that goes into porn or a whole lot of other areas as well. I think the desensitisation that Father Mitch and Amy have covered, I think is really important as well. Boys need to understand that what they're seeing is not real. The more you do it, the more dopamine's released, etc. And once you give boys, though, that kind of information, they really do understand what's going on more. Now, is it going to stop them watching porn? Probably not. But it's going to give them some ideas and some choices. And to me, education is key. They then have a much bigger toolbox to draw from when they're analysing anything, I think, as well. So they're my thoughts. I think also the other thing I wanted to cover is the LGBTIQ plus community as well. I think that for young men especially, they're not seeing often them representing, if they're a gay young man or a bi young man, transgendered, they're not seeing themselves in media and so forth. So when they go to porn and stuff, you know, some of the things that they're seeing there are really quite graphic and intense, and they're scared to death of, you know, having sex because it's so graphic for them. And I don't think that's a great way of educating young LGBTIQ young people around sexuality. I think we need to be doing much better around that.
Great, thanks.
That's my thoughts.
Yeah, no, thank you. Really rich conversation. And Jai, you're one of our panelists, and you brought this to the table too. What are you picking up from this conversation? What are your reflections? What do you think's working as well?
So yeah, look, I think, and it's come up quite a few times from multiple people in this chat, is sort of, I guess, engaging on a level playing field, so without having that authoritative sort of way of being, and sort of saying, yeah, like, you know, this is bad or good or whatever. I've found what's worked with me, and I stopped calling myself a mentor, and that's why I've sort of said with a you know, engagement, I'm just another bloke, or I can, you know, be like a brother, and that even footing straight away has helped me with the conversations I've had. I've really found what's worked is actually just having stories about how it's been for me as a how when I was a boy at the same age or faced with the same issues, what happened with me, and it's quite honest as well, and particularly talking about where I've been told something and I've learnt, but I've still made that mistake again, and that's okay. But then I may have made the mistake a couple of times, but then eventually I learnt. And I was really able to empower myself to learn that way. And having those conversations with the young fellas definitely really puts just thought bubbles into their head. So saying, you know, I tried this, I did this, now there's opportunities to do this. I don't really say you should do this or this, but, you know, maybe that could work for you, maybe that won't. And that's really, I remember having one conversation with a guy that was turning 18, and I had the similar conversation multiple times, and it was about relationships, and he slowly opened up about it. It was based off he eventually asked me, he said, how come when I'm with, you know, my girlfriend, that you know, it's all good, but I don't really want her, and then when she breaks up with me, all of a sudden I want her. And he was really struggling with it because he was caught in two worlds. And of course, there's the psychology behind the attachment theory stuff, and whatever may have happened traumatically. But the only way I got to that was talking to him about stories about my life, and when I've had my down patches and relationship stuff when I was 18. So I really find, you know, if we can find a generation of young, pretty much, you know, men or women, but people to facilitate these conversations and come in with your lived experience. You know, we see a lot of roles these days with government and NGO spaces are looking for lived experience as a factor of how to best engage with your clientele. But when it comes to, you know, us having these conversations, whether they be with our personal relationships or in a professional setting, it's really being able to tell your story and see if points stick to youth. Another one was, you know, we talked about the saying, treat them mean, keep them keen, and stuff around that. And again, yes, it comes back to that language that we use, and things like that. But yeah, really finding that even setting, and it takes time. And that's where I guess we get the struggles when we're looking at systems that essentially won't allow for those conversations. Schooling can be quite rigid, and make it tricky to have those conversations. You know, I've yet to see life skills classes that really talk about relationships regularly. And I'd really like to see that sort of start to be embedded into curriculums, as that you know, we talk about our relationships as well. And sexuality is a huge one. I remember, you know, I play rugby league up here, and I play footy with the boys and a lot of the young men here. And I remember the anxious feeling that went over the room when we were talking about sexuality. And I said, you know what, when I was your age, I actually asked myself if I was gay or not. And that really opened up a conversation. And I actually had two of the young fellas come up to me, would have been about a month later, and said, oh, you know what, I've actually had that thinking before, but I thought there was something wrong with me. I said, no, there's nothing wrong with you at all. So it's just sort of allowing parts out for that. But the other flip side too is that if we want our young men to come in and talk to young boys and younger men about our stories, ensuring that we've got the support and knowledge for that if any trauma comes up, or being able to understand our own journeys, that we've got that support as well. Yeah, that's about it.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Jai. It's really interesting just to be in this conversation. You know, I've been in Zoom for having all these different men's health talks and panels and things, which have all been extraordinary in different ways. I've been doing it for nearly a month now, and you can get into a bit of a format, you know, and you kind of go, right, okay, we need to talk about porn, right? So we'll need 3 panelists. We'll need someone to do the stats and the science. And then we'll need someone with lived experience will come and tell their story about how they had an awful problem with porn, and then they turned their life around and now they're saving the world. And then we need an excellent example of an intervention called the No Porn Project, and they'll deliver 12 slides, which will tell us from A to Z very simply and quickly what you need to do in order to stop porn. We'll ask a couple of questions, and then we'll move on to the next session. And, you know, that would have been all right. It kind of works, but this kind of unfolding kind of like conversation, which has emerged simply because, you know, we have got 2 panelists rather than 3 because of circumstances, and because both of our speakers kind of just placed porn on the table as the issue, as one of the issues they'd love to explore. And I've had no idea where this conversation was going to go. And I've been in it, and it's unfolded for me, and it's been really interesting. And I think where I'm at in this conversation right now, as it unfolds, is certainly not a place of, like, you know, a settled conclusion, but an awareness of how we start to systemize stuff very quickly, and try and simplify everything into a system, whether that's setting up a 1-hour panel discussion or trying to solve a social issue like pornography. I instantly think, okay, what is the perfect school program that you could give a talk for 30 minutes and you would get, you'd have something to measure beginning and end, and you could evaluate it. And if only that was delivered to every single boy in every single school, then we would resolve the issue. And it's like, we're talking about relationships, but what you've spoken about so much is about relationships. You know, going back to Gary talking about getting the dads and the boys around the fire and opening up conversations there, going to Amy and sort of talk about the way they open up the conversation in a relational way, or Jane sharing about the conversations at home on the sofa, or Father Mitch talking about understanding that importance of actually, if you want to develop long-term healthy relationships in the future, you need to be thinking about intimacy and not just gratification. And Jai talking about being able to build relationship with some of the young men that he works through conversation and personal storytelling, which ties back to the storytelling that Jane was referring to. And it's like, this is like an ongoing relational conversation that needs to be sort of dealt with. This is where I'm at. That needs to be dealt with in ongoing conversation. And somehow, if we're going to systemize anything, we need to systemize our ability to talk about this stuff much more openly and freely. With across the generations, across the genders, and you know, I think we've modelled that a little bit in this conversation by just allowing it to unfold. And I've really enjoyed this conversation. Amy, you want to say something to wrap it up?
Yeah, look, just a quick thing to add to that, Glenn. I think it's really important to acknowledge that connection and that relationship building is so important for our young men. But I really believe it's very holistic. We can't be talking about building healthy relationships unless we address mental health, unless we address anger management, unless we address peer pressure. So I think in terms of the work that we do with young males, it's very holistic in nature, and it's using our entire community to come together to address relationships by focusing on different components.
Brilliant. Thanks, Amy. I'm looking forward to hearing more from you in the final session. I'm going to end this conversation there and say thank you to our panelists. Then I'll come and check the mics of our speakers for the next session, and then just introduce you to our president, Greg Milan, who I'll ask to have a bit of chat with you all whilst I go and prepare myself for the next session. Got to change into a different costume, check my makeup, all that. Sure, you'll understand. So, thank you for our official panelists, to Jane Higgins of the Odyssey program, and Jai Cardona with all the work he's doing, including his connection up there with the Darwin Indigenous Men's Service, and for everyone who's contributed to that conversation, in particular Father Mitch Porter, Gary Scott of the Men's Work Project, Amy Harvison, and Arian, our spokesperson for youth in WA, as our official only bloke under 25 in this conversation.